Okay, Venice during the Renaissance and the Mannerism in Cinquecento, Italy, so the 1500s, and we're going to talk about Titian. Okay, so what's going on in Venice? We've talked about Rome, we've talked about Milan, we've talked about Florence, and now let's see what's going on in Venice at this time. And it's Titian in particular, and it's Titian, Titian. And so what's happening in Venice is it's going through some major turmoil, a lot of infighting. But at the same time, they've learned a really great technique that Titian is going to be able to utilize, which makes him known as a colorist. A colorist, C-O-L-O-R-I-S-T, a colorist. And that is the technique of mixing fritted glass in with the oil paint, which is going to enable light to penetrate the oil. So it's going to make the oil look even more luminous. And with that, he's going to learn how to mix colors in a way to really harness that light, which is that fritted, very fine pieces of reflective glass mixed in with the oil paint. Okay. And also, what was really prominent about Venice at this time was its trade with pigments. It was like the center of not only the pigments that were going into the oils, but also now this fritted technique of glass being mixed in with the oils. So though there's a lot of sociological fighting and problems in Venice, these techniques really allowed Venice to step out of the shadows of that turmoil and become prominent in the Renaissance at this time. And it's Titian and his predecessor Bellini in particular that brought this forward. But we're going to talk about Titian in particular. Again, he's a colorist, and this is allowing him, and we're going to start with figure 22.33, Assumption of the Virgin. And this allowed him to create hues that shifted in extreme value in saturation. And what this did is it gave way to what is called mood in color, M-O-O-D, in color. So again, by showing extreme shifts in saturation with the color from extreme light to extreme dark, and that chiaroscuro of not light and dark, but color hues shifting in saturation of light and dark, that gives way to what is a mood. It has a mood in the color. And that's why we call him a colorist, because it has an emotion to the color. And with Assumption of the Virgin, it made a Titian official painter after his teacher Bellini died. Okay, and you can look at a piece of Bellini's, which would be figure 2230, just to give you an idea of where Titian is coming from. And you can see the more thick coloration of hues and pigments. Again, Venice is known for having the best pigments, as well as grinding down this glass and mixing it in with the oil, which is what makes the richness in the color from dark greens to really light greens, and be able to do stuff like that. But we're going to talk about figure 2233 here. So it made him the main painter in Venice after his teacher passed away, and he again was a master in color, allowing glowing radiance and variety. So variety of color and radiance coming out of the color, right? So you can see that in the cloud, for example, that is in the middle of the composition, and it has this glowing radiance of almost like giving color to even gray, and giving color to even black, or giving color to even white. And the thing is, gray, black, and white are neutrals. They're not actually colors, but he can give color to these non-colors. And that's what makes him a colorist as well, through this radiance and variety of color that he's mixing in with what are called the neutrals. Okay. Mary's head is on a vertical axis of the painting, so you're looking up at her at this vertical axis versus straight on, which is a very impressive technique to kind of bring all the different bottom, middle, and upper grounds together. So instead of it being fore, middle, and background, it's lower, central, and upper. God is in the upper with the angels, Mary is in the center, and then the people that are praising her are at the bottom. So it's a vertical perspective versus that of a horizontal perspective. um, Also, Mary's head is the center of a circle with the clouds in the U-shaped frame. So if you look at the putti, or are also known as cherubs, they are there beside her on both left and right, and they're creating a circle that goes up to God, and then Mary's head looking upward is actually right in the center of that circular composition. And then also the U-shaped section above God is bringing her head into the center as well. So it's, even though she's asymmetrically off center, her head itself is actually centralized in that upper middle and upper section in the firmament, or above the cloud, above the material world. So it's asymmetrical and off-centered altogether, but within that section in the top, she is centralized. The disciples are in the bottom and with backs towards the viewer, so to make the viewer feel as if they're observing the ascendance of Mary as well. So instead of the followers facing us and looking at us, they're looking at her and their backs towards us to make us feel like we're part of the scene, that we are actually there. So that was Titian's intention, to make it look like we were actually there. Let's see. And this is not a fresco, this is oil on wood, and the reason I mention that is because the moisture and the salt in the air, being in Venice, being right off of the Mediterranean Sea, does not allow for frescoes to be preserved. It breaks down the plaster. The saltine, what's called salinity in the air, would break down the plaster. So these Venice painters like Titian and Bellini did not do frescoes. Okay, they only worked in oil paint, which can't be broken down by the salts, but the frescoes can. All right, so that's why we won't see any frescoes in Venice. We're going to see oil in particular, which makes sense because they're using all the oil pigment that they trade, and then they're also designing these new techniques of embedding and impacting glass in with the oil, which is a new advent altogether, a new invention. Not advent, but an invention. So oil was a prime choice in Venice, and Titian is the one who really used it strongly and put Venice on the map for it. So we're going to look at one more real quick, figure 2235, meeting of Bacchus and Ariadne. And this is a Greco-Roman tale, all right? So it is very specific to the Greco-Roman style. Because we're talking about the Renaissance, and that's the rebirth of antiquity. And so he's taking this story of Bacchus coming and rescuing Ariadne. And yeah, and it wasn't originally his. This is what's really interesting, is Raphael passed away, that we talked about, and Titian took over. He took over this commission, so it was handed to him. Alright, so Raphael followed Leonardo, and now Titian is following Raphael as one of the leading painters, if not the leading painter at this time. Right, so he took over the commission after Raphael passed. It's an ancient Latin Roman tale called Catullus, 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 and it's the story of Bacchus saving this lady. All right, and you can still see the color hue shifting, the saturation, the radiance and the vibrancy, the chiaroscuro from dark to light, and really showing those features throughout this painting that we also saw in the Assumption of the Virgin. So it is a Latin tale, which is making it Roman, which is the Greco-Roman rediscovery and rebirth, okay, from the story Catullus. And what Titian did is he actually looked at classical Hellenistic Laocoon for the satyr in the snakes, and Michelangelo did the same thing whenever it came to his sculptures. So if you go online and look up Laocoon, you'll see what I'm talking about. And the satyr that you're going to look at is the figure in the center right that's fairly darkened, that has a snake wrapping around him. That's the satyr. And that satyr is being derived from that Hellenistic period. So Titian was interested in that Greek aspect. And then he's also interested in the Roman aspect of the story of Bacchus. Okay, so that's what makes it Greco-Roman. That's what makes it a Renaissance painting, the rebirth of these stories in antiquity, both in Latin and then both in Greek. Okay. And then one last thing that he uses as a colorist is the use of ultramarine blue. You can see the blue that's in the skirt, the blue that's in the figure to the far left, Ariadne, and then the blue back in the ocean and in the sky. That ultramarine is a very specific pigment from Venice. So when you see a painting at this time that has this ultramarine blue, then that means that it is most likely a Venice painting coming from Titian or from one of his counterparts, or that individual was painting in Venice at that time, because it's a very expensive pigment, and again, ultramarine blue is what makes it lock into being a true Venice painting. All right. So that's Titian. I'll leave that with you, a shorter video, but that should get us through week 1. All right. I'll see you all very soon.